it's a
Yeah.
lot to juggle, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, part of what I do is jazz radio. This is the other incarnation of what I do. So you merge perfectly into both of those forks in the road. So I'm looking forward to getting into it. So before we get into your life as an artist, I want to begin our conversation that really affected the artist community pretty heavily, which was COVID. 4 years ago, we were trying to figure out how long was this going to last, how it was going to materialize, what the effect was going to be. Now that we're kind of in this post-pandemic era, how did you make it through it? And how did it change you?
Well, that's a great question, and I feel like you're saying we're through it, and I feel like we're not quite through it.
Well,
Maybe that's
no, I'm not saying that. And I'm always careful because I did air quotes. That's why
yeah,
I did that. And I know that it kind of it's a contentious thing, but I'm not saying that. What I'm saying more or less is we're not under the clowny governmental like warnings every day, and we're not walking around with masks all the time. It's
that's
more of we're kind of in this era right now where I think we're not doing what we were doing before, but just kind of, while we were in the eye of the storm, how did you make it through?
yeah. Well, the day I found out that our governor announced that we were shutting everything down, I thought, well, man, what do I have in my hands that I can still use to do music? And I thought, well, I've got my grand piano and I have my phone. And so I immediately emailed all my fans and I said, hey, let's get together on Facebook Live and just spend some time together. And so I thought, this will happen for 2 weeks and then we'll be good. We'll move on and it'll be back to normal. And 6 months later, I was still doing a Facebook Live event on the weekdays. Every day I called it Hit Pause. So we just kind of hit pause and I became the music soundtrack to a lot of my fans. I'd just sit at the grand piano and I'd play songs, I'd cry, I'd laugh. For me, it was really a time of upheaval with all my performance canceled. And
Yeah.
how do you keep going and keep making music and connecting with people at the same time? So it actually became a really meaningful thing. I did a CD project out of it. Fans were so supportive, buying my music. Like I sold product. It was just, it was a really sweet, bitter time, as I know it is for many of us. Like I spent a lot of times crying, and my husband would just say, I'm sorry. Like he's self-employed too, but his business did okay during the pandemic. Mine was greatly affected. So, he just tried to say, man, I'm sorry. Hang in there. And so some beautiful things came out of it, but man, it was rough. And I do still feel like I'm recovering from it. Like I kind of have started referring to this as, I feel like I'm in act two now of my music, and the pandemic was an intermission.
Yeah.
And I would say I've never been fond of intermissions. Like I never quite know what to do with them.
Yeah.
Um, so that's how I kind of analyze it. Yeah, we need time to stop and refocus, and I think that's what the pandemic did for a lot of us. But it's tough.
Yeah, for sure. So along with the music, there's a lot of other things that are a part of your world and what you do. So I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third grade students at career day. One of the kids looks up and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
I play the piano and I write songs.
Okay. So what did you want to be when you were in the third grade? Was this your dream?
I listened to your other episodes. I'm like, oh, he's going to ask me that question. What am I going to say? And I would say in third grade, I had no idea. I mean, I would make up concerts for our family in our farmhouse living room, and I would take chess pieces on our chessboard, and I would make little choirs out of them instead of like I to this day I don't know how to play chess, but I would make choirs out of them. But my mother had a an illness that we couldn't figure out what it was. And so she was very sick when I was third grade-ish age. And man, I was just trying to survive as a child. And I turned to my piano a lot to play and to comfort me. But I feel like my desire for what I wanted to do really showed up later. I see clues of it now when I was little that were manifesting, but I couldn't have said at that time, man, this is what I want to be.
Are you originally from Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So who were early influences for you? Who did you look up to musically?
Um, at that time, my listening was my musical influences were very restricted. I grew up in a really sheltered home and community, even my high school and so forth. So at that time, it became Christian radio and classical, like NPR, classical music. And I was studying classical music on the piano. So I think at those times, it was just my parents were actually my influence, and I just wanted to please them and do what made them happy, and they seemed to enjoy my playing the piano. So uh, my musical influences really came later in life.
So you're clearly leaving an indelible mark by doing live shows with people that watch you. I'm going to reverse that table and ask you, what was the first live show that you saw that really sparked your interest and made you think, wow, I want to do that one day?
Well, interestingly enough, mine came from seeing a Christmas show in Lancaster area at the American Music Theater. I was there with a group of people, and at that point in my career, I knew for sure music was what I wanted to do. And I was trying to find the sweet, sweet spot of it. Like there's so much you could do with music. So I'm like, what do I really want to do? And it was an amazing Christmas show with great popular music, but I felt like it was missing a personal touch. Like I wanted to know more from the performers. Like, okay, I get that you're great musicians, but what is your story? Like, what is your life? And I decided, I just remember sitting in that show and going, that's what I want to do. I want a big professional Christmas show, but I want to put a personal stamp on it, like that people walk away feeling like they've had coffee with me
Yeah.
and they've enjoyed a professional show. So that kind of became my focal point of my music. Like that's when it all really blossomed for me, I would say. But in high school, when I was taking piano lessons, the first seed of it was when my piano teacher put on recitals, and we all had a chance to play our piece. And I went home to my mother and my piano teacher, and I said, you know what, I want to do my own piano recitals where it's all my music. It's it's just me, and I invite my friends. And honestly, I have no idea where that drive came from, but I just remember she gave me a taste of what it was like to put together a program, invite people, and entertain them with music. And I between that's when I remember getting my first seed of interest in that's what I want to do. I want to take pieces, elements of music, story, learn the music, put it together, and create a meaningful event. But I could have never articulated that at that age. I just knew that, wow, I like this getting up on stage and entertaining people. So I did a few recitals like that. I invited my friends. My mother made a special treats. We had beautiful presentation of food, and my mother went along right along with it. And I was like, it was an American Music Theater that I was like, okay, now that's what I want to do. The
Yeah.
lighting, the amazing audio, the orchestra, but a personal twist on it.
So who's been kind of an inspiration for you, musically or otherwise, or a hero in your life?
My music producer,
Yeah.
Eric Copeland, Creative Soul Records. He's a jazz musician, but he became my producer, my mentor, and he just continually innovates in this world of changing music. And he inspires me to get up and keep going because he's continually saying, okay, this is a new day now. How do we do music and continue to make a living doing it in this current state? So Eric Copeland is my one of my heroes.
So if you could meet one musician alive and spend time with them or see them live, who would it be?
Taylor Swift.
Okay. Excellent.
It used to be Enya, and I still love Enya, but I really, really admire Taylor Swift and the way she's overcome so many challenges and built something out of her songs, like
Yeah.
just because of her songs. So I admire that about her, and I'd love to just sit and talk to her.
Yeah, Enya is wonderful. I remember that was one of my earlier kind of influences of really enjoying um just pure, just piano, that realm of music. It's yeah, she's wonderful. I think she's still doing music now. I think she's still putting stuff out.
I think so, yeah, but she's
Yeah.
just very, what's the word? Well, she doesn't do live stuff, like, it's all I mean, she's very, I can't think of the word, um, introspective or very personal, I guess, solitude, I guess is what I would say. Like, you don't, my understanding is you really can't catch her in an interview or a live show. She just does everything in her recording studio. And I find that amazing to have such success and yet not be like, she's the total opposite of Taylor Swift, who's
Uh-huh.
out there doing big shows and all that. And yet it seems very recluse. That's the word I'm looking for,
Yeah.
recluse. And yet she's made a mark. So
Yeah. Yeah. So you've been at this music game for quite a while. What is the ultimate motivation for you consistently? What has been the key to your longevity, getting up every day and creating this music and kind of, you know, paying homage to your artistic spirit?
I think it's just the ideas. I just thrive. I always have ideas of this project or that project, and I've come to the conclusion that it's projects that make me want to get up and set goals, and I can be exhausted the night before and say, man, I quit. I just quit. It's too hard. But then I wake up fresh the next morning. I'm like, oh, but I could do this and I could do that, and I need to keep going. And I've heard enough interviews of other musicians who say it's not the most talented that succeed, it's those who hang in there the longest. And I remember hearing that and going, I can do that. I can hang in there long. And I mean, how do you feel about that statement? Does that concur with your experience?
You know, I'm a visual artist too, and I remember my first real big art I just had my son. He was maybe one. This was in '05, and I got a show in the Crossroads Art District in Kansas City, which is a pretty big district. And I remember at one point as I was bringing my pieces in and hanging them up, somebody said something along the lines of, this is all fine and dandy. I see artists come in all the time, really into the idea that they got the big Crossroads art show, but it's what do you do after this? Where do you go? How does this materialize? Because there is something to be said about longevity. I saw a 60 Minutes interview with Billy Joel recently, and they were asking him, like, and this was like in the 80s, and they were like, how did this happen? You know, you're the guy, you're the one of the most popular singer-songwriters on the planet right now. And he basically just broke it down and said it's all about just I was just in the right place. I'm just a hardworking guy that just got the break. And there was nothing magnanimous about it. It was nothing more than that. And I've read books on that, like how things go viral, how things get big, and it's a mystery. Half of it's a mystery, but half of it is just really more or less about waking up every day and doing what you love. And
Yeah.
things can just happen, it's one foot in front of the other. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. Opportunity and luck all at the same time. Preparation. That's what
Yeah.
luck is, right? Preparation and opportunity meet at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, there's a weird misperception with the public about musicians, like say a band like U2 or the Beatles. They think it just happened. Like all of a sudden they had their first show, like the Beatles had a show in the cave, and all of a sudden they were a sensation. No, it took them a decade, and it took U2 a decade. And they had to work and they had to get out there and they had to do all these things. Like I just saw a a documentary on the Indigo Girls about how they began, and they were
oh,
childhood friends in Atlanta, and it just kind of took off. And even at one point when they really got big, they were like, the interviewer was like, "Are you guys famous? Do you feel like, how do you feel about this fame?" And they're just both looking at each other like, "I don't think we're there." And it's
yeah.
weird the perception when you're in the eye of the tornado or inside the peanut butter jar, you don't see the label. It just kind of eludes you, so to
Yeah,
speak.
that's a great analogy. Yeah, the
Yeah.
peanut butter jar. Hmm.
Someone said that a while back, and I was like, I can't believe I went my whole life without hearing that.
I like it. I like it. I'm
It's
gonna think
cool.
about it now every time I eat peanut butter.
That's it. I can't see the label because I'm too close. So,
Yeah.
so I'm curious, of all of these things that you've done and all of the crowds you played in front of, what is there, what's your favorite, like, part of your career where you think you grew the most or you had magnanimous moments on stage?
Oh, wow. I think it would be deciding to do that Christmas show doing it, hiring an orchestra, having never worked with an orchestra before, meeting incredible musicians, working with them, and and just having to navigate. Like, I feel like I got a college degree without the degree, uh, um, just by deciding to do that professional show. I mean, I was doing lots of stuff just as a solo artist, but in smaller places, you know, there's something wrong with the sound, or the mic doesn't work, or the piano has keys that don't work. Like, there was always something, and I wanted a show where everything was perfect, and I learned that it's rarely ever perfect, even when you try to make it perfect. But the gem is the gem is in learning the flexibility and just going in the moment with the audience, and connecting with those the moments when I can see the audience connect. I see the tear in their eye, or they laugh, or they come to me afterwards and say, wow, you sharing your story gave me permission to whatever. In my case, it's connected to a lot of grief and loss that happened in my family as a child. And people say, wow, I feel like you gave me permission to grieve, and to understand that when you lose somebody, you'll probably grieve all your life. Like, it'll always impact you. There'll always be a soft spot in your heart. And in this world, it can feel easy. Like, we just need to be tough and pull it all together and move on. And my life and my music, I believe, seems to give people a permission to say, wow, okay, so I'm not the only one that has some tough times here. And I'm not sure I answered your question.
You did, you absolutely did, and I kept thinking about in my 20s, I had good friends that were in a band that went pretty far, and they used to always talk about sounds and how their instruments weren't tuned or the sound guy wasn't doing what he's doing. We don't know that in the crowd. Like I play the drums a little bit, but I've kind of stayed away from music. Like I've delved into too many things that are creatively driven. I want one thing to be a mystery.
Yeah.
So I just want to present it. I don't want to know it. I don't want to know the notes. But there is that idea that when you're in the crowd and you're an untrained musician, you don't hear the peccadillos that you will on stage. We just don't
Yeah.
get it. But we will get the heart and soul of it. We're going to understand what's coming out of you. And like Charlie Parker said, your what comes out of your horn is really kind of an embodiment of who you are. It's the soul of what you have. So we're going to get that. But I get it. I mean, there's just you just don't want it to sound wrong. And if you got a trained ear, you want it to be the best it can be. But I can tell you right now, us in the crowd, we're not hip to it. It's not happening.
Well, that's great to know. I hear that a lot, and I just have to believe you.
Right. You got to
Because
go on faith.
yeah, and I started working with a performance coach in Nashville years ago that just totally changed my perspective on the audience just wants to go and entertained and be challenged and
Sure.
inspired. And when we're up there concerned about the lighting and the audio, we can't hear the monitor. Like, I quickly learned from him that the audience doesn't even know half of what we're talking about,
Yep.
but they do know if you're not comfortable, or if you're nervous, or like, they know passion, and they just know if they're touched. And our goal and our job really as an artist on stage is to make that happen for the audience, to give them a meaningful, incredible time. So
It,
yeah.
it's almost like a glorified movie. I mean, audiences want to get away from their world for a while. I
Yeah.
remember going to St. Louis back in the early 2000s to see Radiohead, which was a big deal. And
Mhm.
everybody always said it's all about the mood that Tom York's in. And I'm like, man, because I mean, it could be that night, but I remember that night he was really amped up and he was in a good mood and it was a great show. But half of the ire that was going on at that time with them was what we're dealing with now, which is ticket prices. He was really upset with Clear Channel and he was very vocal about it. It's that whole idea. I mean, when Taylor Swift came to Kansas City and tickets started at Arrowhead, it was astronomical. I think even after that whole cloud of how expensive it was went away, it was still expensive. I mean, it's
Yeah.
crazy, you
Yeah.
know. So
Yeah, I was thinking of going to see her in Toronto, Canada, because that's the closest to me without flying somewhere at this point. And it was like $1,000 for a ticket. I'm like, wow. But on the other hand, as a songwriter trying to carve out, and a musician, like that's where I just really respect her. Like she didn't get there overnight. She didn't
No.
charge $1,000 when she started. And that's the thing I think we don't always realize. People, most of these people have paid their dues and worked hard, and so yeah.
It's wild.
So that makes sense. I listened to a lot of your neon jazz episodes,
Oh,
and
cool.
I was curious. I think now I understand that you said there's one area of art that you want to still be a mystery, and it sounds like that's music for you. But what made you want to do a podcast around jazz music and interview musicians? Like it's really fascinating.
I originally got into sports broadcasting. I started my journalistic world in college, and I always wanted to be on the set at ESPN. I wanted to be a big sportscaster.
Ah,
And
okay.
in college, I kind of got into it. I did pre and post game production for the Royals games and got on the inside and was in the clubhouse with the players. And I'm like, I just don't feel it. It doesn't, it's, there's a lot of stress. There was a lot of really abrasive egos, and I just didn't want to be around it. So I got out and I got into technology. And years later, I went after a particularly hard construction year in my backyard. We were trying to get a pool together and do all this stuff. I went to a thrift store and found a raccoon that Radio Shack sold in the 80s that had the radio in its belly. So I get this, I put it on my porch, I turn it on, and there's this show called The Neon Beat, and they're playing the song Kansas City. And the DJ is amazing. His name's John Christopher. And I reach out and I write him a letter. I think I even made a video of the raccoon, and he loved it. And he came back and said, I loved
Wow.
it. So I was doing part-time journalism and said, you want to interview? And we interviewed. And at the end of the interview, he said, I live 4 blocks away from you. He's an engineer by day and had all this old equipment from radio stations, and said, why don't you write a script and come to my house? So I've
Wow.
always loved jazz. I had a good friend, his name was John Sweetwood, back in my 20s, that baptized me in jazz. So I wrote a jazz script. And since 2011, I've done it. And I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm not getting jazz history from a book. I'm doing it from the musician. This is their story. It's a very unique American art form, and it's going to come from their mouths. And it just went from there. And I love it. And the jazz musician community, they are the nicest, most humble, yet most talented group of people I've ever met on this planet.
I agree. I ended up hiring in my orchestra for my Christmas show. I ended up hiring jazz musicians without really knowing it. Somebody contracted them for me, and that was my baptism into jazz. Like
Yeah,
I started going to their concerts. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing music, and
uh-huh.
they were amazing people. And
Absolutely.
they're now my friends, and I now go to their jazz concerts, and I still hire them for my music, even though mine isn't jazz. We usually feature a number of them, but the saxophonist in ours played with the Glenn Miller Orchestra a long time ago and
Yeah.
graduated from Eastman. They're just really special people, and I
Yep.
still use a jazz piano player in my show and have him do some stuff when I don't, because jazz just really isn't my. I've been curious about it as a piano player and would like to learn it, but I really need to stay focused
Sure.
on what I've already learned. But I'm with you. Like they are amazing people.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I was listening to all those. I'm like, so how does somebody who's not a musician get so interested in this? And
Yeah.
I see that now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think there was a lot of musicians here that were kind of like, what's going on here? And I've been here long enough and they understand.
Yeah,
I go to a lot of shows. So yeah, it's
yeah,
because everybody that does radio and does anything nationally, especially nationally with jazz, they're all musicians. And even locally here that are on on stations, they're all musicians. So I'm one of the
well,
exceptions, which is fine.
I've enjoyed the interviews.
Well,
So
thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, it's been fun. So of all of these things that you've done in your career, what are you the proudest of?
Uh, I did an album. My last album was called Midwinter's Gift. It was with an oboist. It was an instrumental album, a Christmas album, and we ended up on Billboard charts like a couple weeks after we released the album. Didn't see that coming, and I'd say I'm most proud of that, and maybe not as much for the Billboard chart as much as the fact that I did it after the pandemic, and to me, and I'm getting older, so there's just that what if people don't want me on stage when I'm in my 50s, 60s? Like there's that happening post pandemic too now, is that I've aged. We've all aged.
Yeah.
But I was on a roll, I was on a momentum before the pandemic, and I feel like it just got knocked I just got out of the routine, out of the momentum I was building. But out of that came a beautiful music project and won an award. And like, so it was more about the fact that this is an acknowledgement that you can still do your dream even when you're older. And it's worth hanging in there for. It's worth all the tears and blood and sweat to hang in there and get up every morning and keep doing it. So that's, I feel like that's what I'm proud of. It's just that it was a sign to say you did it, you're still doing it, way to go, girl. So yeah.
Yeah, I get that because my dream really at the end of the day was, listening to baseball on the radio. I always wanted to be at that point where I could broadcast, and I've done
Oh,
it, and I did it late in life, but it is that idea. It's the whole thing that you're just it's never too late, and it can always happen if you want it to happen. So it's cool.
yeah.
So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, and your fans, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, I am driven, I'm tenacious, I'm I'm a dreamer for sure. But I think the best way to sum up, I have a great nephew, his name is Caden, and when he was like 2 or 3, he started calling me Aunt Fancy. And my name is Frances, and my family, my siblings call me Francie, but he just started calling me Aunt Fancy. And I'm like, you know what? That's who I am.
That's it.
I love to dress up. I love elegance. I love to put on fancy shows. It's always who I've been. So yeah, that's me, Aunt Fancy.
I love it. That's great. That should be on a coffee cup.
It
So,
should be.
so Frances, if anyone wants to get your music, find out about live shows, anything else about your world, where can they go?
francesdrost.com.
Okay. One-stop shop. Frances, this has been wonderful. Thank you. I'm glad we ran into each
Thank you.
other.
Yeah, thank you.
Keep doing the great work. Thank you for listening to the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for doing the show.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right.